Hello and welcome back to the Nasty Metal Production channel here at YouTube, and welcome to another album of the week. This is episode number 111, and since I had announced this back on last week's episode, which it was at the end of that episode, which was episode number 110, which was a feature on Juggernaut of Justice from Anvil. So here we are here on Monday. That means it is here. You can see the title and you see the artwork. You know what album it is. It is the third and also the second full-length album for Bruce Dickinson, though he is under the name Bruce here. Of course, this is definitely before he would jump ship to Iron Maiden, but that is, again, for another story. Again, hopefully I will get to tell the rest of that story on whenever I cover the at least release after this album. No, not the actual full-length album, but the live record. So it is it. It is Shock Tactics from Samson, which again, this is the only site that actually gives out its proper date and month that this album was released. It's Wikipedia. It was released on May 15th, 1981. That means since May 15th here was this past Saturday, it has already reached its 40th anniversary. And so what better way to celebrate this album then is on this channel. And again, finally going to celebrate this good third full-length album from Samson. So let's definitely get into it. Since last year I had covered Head On, which was the album that preceded this one. It was also the actual debut album for Bruce Dickinson, and at least on a full-length record, really, instead of a 7-inch or what, or maybe demos, because he was in plenty of different bands before joining Samson. And then, well, I don't have to really repeat the other band, even though you know which band it is, since I already just mentioned them. They're one of the hugest, at least selling bands of the past 40 fucking years, actually, since the past 40 years. So again, let's definitely at least kind of begin where Head On left off, since, again, they had just released that record. It actually had hit number 34 on the UK charts, so it did fine. It was also one of the last albums to be released, at least a part of RCA's sub-label GEM, or GEM Records. So it was the final one, and that's, I guess, and it did fine. Again, they were doing a lot of live shows for it. Finally, they get booked for, of course, at the Battery Studios in London on January 2nd, and they were there until January 31st. And again, with Tony Platt as the producer. So finally, it gets mixed, at least depending on one of the day or months it gets mixed, and it's out on May 15th, 1981, through RCA Records. So let's just lead into Shock Tactics from Samson. Okay, so here we are with Shock Tactics here. Again, going to, of course, do a track listing rundown. We have about 9 songs on this album, and at least it all clocks in at 39 minutes and 46 seconds. So these 9 songs are, it opens up with their classic cover of the Russ Ballard track, Riding with the Angels, which is pretty much, in a way, it does get considered a new wave or British heavy metal staple, but I'll get more on that a little later here. So let's definitely move on to the next track, which is Earth Mother, then Nice Girl, Bloodlust, Go to Hell, Bright Lights, Once Bitten, Grime Crime, and Communion. So there we go. There's your 9 songs. And of course, let's just move in to, of course, Riding with the Angels, since I'm going to mention that it was, of course, the only track off the sound that actually received a single, at least. It was actually, I guess, in many ways, it is a hit for Samson. Even though it was a Russ Ballard track, the track Riding with the Angels here is really most associated best with Samson, because they just did a overcharged fucking version of this song. And the thing is, again, it was released as a single. And of course, with the B-side is Little Big Man, just to at least, because I think I said bid, which is fucking stupid, but I'm talking fast, okay? I'm a fast talker here. So Little Big Man is, of course, the B-side on it, and it's a leftover that didn't really make the cut of the album. And then there's two other songs I'll have to get to that didn't really get to make the cut that would end up seeing the light of day when Shock Tactics would be at least reissued on CD. So there we go. All right. Again, do I really need to talk anymore about their cover of the Russ Ballard track, Riding with the Angels? I mean, this song, I went back months ago, over a year ago, I was kind of curious how the original version sounded, but I do have to say, I think Samson, did a much better version of this one. They really just supercharged it. Because the original version that Russ Ballard did is fine. I can listen to it. It's a okay track. But you knew it was meant to be a raging hard rocker. You knew it did. But it didn't really have nearly as much of the bite that you would have expected it to at least had. Again, for a track that was released in, like 1979, I think, or 1978. And so you would have expected to have at least a bit of a meaner bite. Since by that time, the whole sort of hard rock genre was really kind of morphing into more of the heavy metal stuff of the early 80s. And so you kind of knew that right from the beginning, just hearing that sort of riff, that you knew it was going to be a raging rocker, but the guitar tone again, it didn't really have that sort of bite that Paul Samson's had. Okay, because of this right here, they just own this version. This is probably one of the best covers songs out there, really. Put it next to some of the best ones that either Judas Priest did, or even maybe some of the ones Metallica kind of would do. But I think this is really on that sort of that cusp of just being where Samson just did it the best, and it definitely belongs in the sort of list of some of the best cover songs. It's a great track, and Bruce Dickinson. Already, he was a fantastic singer, of course, on Head On. He definitely owned that album for sure. I definitely prefer the Tony Platt alt mix of that album. Again, Tony Platt was also slated to produce that record, but somehow the version that he had mixed, or at least he had done, didn't really see the light of day until almost 40 years after. So again, just fantastic version, though. Again, with a lot of more vocal harmonies and vocals stuff added onto that album that was never heard on the original version. And again, I just definitely prefer that mix of Head On. But on this album, they obviously knew what was wrong, and since they didn't have time to really officially release that version, they knew what they had to do. And so since getting Tony Platt to produce this one, obviously he really helped a lot with Samson here. He could have easily been what Mutt Lange kind of was for AC/DC on those first three. Tony Platt was also the engineer on those class on, again, Highway to Hell, Back in Black, and For Those About to Rock, and then of course Flick of the Switch, and of course then producing some of the stuff for Crocus, again, One Vice at a Time, and then Motorhead on Another Perfect Day. So he definitely has a very good, at least a good ear for this kind of music. He knew what was needed, and he really did great with them. Also Starfighters, I should definitely, again, Stevie Young's band. So he did stuff for them, and he really does a great job, and he was able to really get the best out of these guys. Again, I feel he's on the sort of same level as like either Eddie Kramer, because he definitely knew what was good for at least a band like Kiss, Ace Frehley, and Fastway, and some of those kind of bands. Just too bad that didn't get to translate with bands like Pretty Maids or Raven. I don't know what the fuck happened there. Still, Tony Platt just has a good ear for this kind of music, and he just allows the band to just shine in many ways. And again, I just wish that version of Head On was the one that was the official version, because of that. That's where Bruce Dickinson is he's just absolutely on fire on that version of that album. It's like those vocal additions that was added there just really kind of, it really elevates those tracks. And here, it's just straight up. And again, he just owns Riding with the Angels. he owns this track. Paul Samson owns this track. Everyone in the band just sounds fucking top notch. But again, I don't want to focus on Riding with the Angels. Let me focus on some of the other songs on here, like Earth Mother, which again, a great sort of rocker here that I also dig. Again, Paul Samson, his sort of his vibrato, his sort of his cadence, and his soul is really rooted within more blues rock stuff. He's definitely more of a 70s rocker in tradition. I mean, it's no different from, let's say, again, AC/DC, at least in some cases, or White Snake, that kind of stuff, where it's more blues rock in its just in its soul, but in sort of attack and approach, it's still a lot harder, and it's got a heavier edge. I mean, again, during this time period, the new wave for British heavy metal movement was in full swing. I mean, Def Leppard also releasing their one of their first really big record in 1981. I mean, Pyromania is their hugest record, but High and Dry was their first, I mean, really big record in a way. It was their first big hit, and that album did good for them. And then Denim and Leather from Saxon, which hopefully also we'll get to talk about too. There's still plenty of great records that came out during this period that was a part of the new wave of British heavy metal movement, and this album, Shock Tactics, just fit right in. And the thing is, a guy like Paul Samson, again, most of them always had that sort of bluesy sort of feel to them. It was still influenced by the classic sort of British hard rock, early proto-metal bands of the 1970s. And again, just updated to being a little more visceral in its attack. But there's still the good ones. I do dig like Nice Girl. Bloodlust is another sort of nice grimy fucking track. Same goes for like Grime Crime. Again, that one, Grime Crime, to also kind of here talk about a bit. If for those that were taken back by some of Bruce Dickinson's more harsher style, vocal style on No Prayer for the Dying and Fear of the Dark, should go back and listen to Grime Crime off this album, because this song predates his vocal styles on those two albums, because he's a lot more angrier and vicious sounding, which actually fits a sort of almost this dark tone of it. It's a straight up heavy bluesy, heavy rocker that it is one of my favorite songs off this one. Same goes for Go to Hell and Bloodlust. All good songs too. There's just really not a bad song on here. I mean, just from, again, their cover of Riding with the Angels up to Grime Crime, it's a full-on rocker. But then it ends with Communion, which then again, Walking Out on You on Head On was a bit of a ballady kind of track. It ended like that, but I always kind of thought that might have been the most strongest song to ever end, at least these two Samson albums. Communion's okay. It's a fine sort of ballad, and again, Bruce Dickinson can sing a good ballad. Again, I do prefer these ballads over some of the ones that would end up being on, Wasting Love off of Fear of the Dark. I mean, that's a fine ballad, but this one, I think Communion and Walking Out on You, I think are probably two of the best ballads I think Bruce Dickinson had ever at least sang on. Again, I think compared to the guys in Iron Maiden, who are probably better at really writing more long progressive in some cases. I mean, I would never call Iron Maiden a progressive band, but they always had that sort of atmosphere where they could do softer tracks, but they were never really meant to really write ballads. Whereas Paul Samson, I think, had a better knack for writing ballads that I think Bruce Dickinson just sounds the best on. So he just really, he makes all of this work. Again, to give credit where it's due, Paul Samson, again, I think was an underrated guitar player to come out of the new wave for British heavy metal movement. I mean, yeah, a guy like John Sykes probably was a more technically better guitar player than Paul Samson, but I feel that over those years, while John Sykes was a fantastic guitar player, same goes for like Vivian Campbell, again, the two of the biggest ones that come out of this movement. I think Paul Samson staying underground and sticking to what he did better, I think, to me, I felt saved his image compared to those two because of John Sykes. And then moving into like Whitesnake and then Blue Murder, obviously trying to really attract the sort of the LA metal market. Then same thing with Vivian Campbell, always trying to at least to really to get the attention of the American market, whereas Paul Samson kind of, but I would say he was still really just trying to stick to his British roots throughout all of his period, even if the image was changing. Listening to some of those stuff on some of those later albums, at least sipping through them, he really kept his British roots together. He didn't really try and wanted to completely go and move or at least to expand into those markets, because then that meant, again, changing some of his sound. He didn't really change his sound. He stuck to what he liked. Again, that stuff might work for AC/DC. I mean, Angus Young, for example, it might work for him, but because again, biggest band on the entire world, and so really when you get that big, anything you can do, if you stick to your fucking guns, it's not going to hurt your damn image, because of you're pretty much already are selling out shit tons of tickets and to so many shows, so why fucking change? But when it comes to underground artists, it's always the tougher, because of if a label doesn't think you're apparently are worth being promoted, or at least to be that exposed, somehow it's always becomes to where those artists who are stuck at that sort of level are the ones that feel they have to keep the try and search for that sort of level, because of they want fame. Seems like I know apparently there's been an interview with Bruce Dickinson where apparently they cared about girls apparently and wanted a bit of fame. I don't know. I feel some of that might have been. I felt some of that stuff was best taken with a grain of salt, because of, I don't know. I think Paul Samson just wanted to stick to what he wanted to do, and that was not really care about any of the fucking markets. He just wanted to put out what he wanted to put out instead. And that's what you kind of get with this album. This is all what he wanted. This is his style. This is his sort of writing. And Bruce Dickinson, I think, is one of the best ones that really translated better. Even though no complaints against Nicky Moore, who I thought was also a good replacement for Bruce Dickinson, and really just elevated more of that blues, sort of heavy blues sound of some of those later Samson records. I think it was fine. He did good with some of those. And again, also Thunderstick. Again, underrated fucking drummer. He is obviously, to me, one of the best drummers I think Samson ever had. It's just too bad that he wouldn't stick around with Samson. So either way, some of these songs are good. So I don't want to talk too long about some of these songs, because again, they're all just great tracks. And again, personal favorites again being their cover of Ride with the Angels, Bloodlust, Nice Girl, Bright Lights, Once Bitten, and Grime Crime are probably up there as one of my absolute favorite tracks off this album. So very good stuff. So let me focus though, before I really end anything else, let's focus on the 3 leftover songs that didn't really make the album. Again, first one being Little Big Man, which was, again, like I said earlier, it was the B-side to Riding with the Angels. It was the B-side. It's a fine song. It's a good sort of fun rocker, but at the same time, I think they chose some of the best stuff already for it. However, it's the other 2 songs that didn't ever get to see the light of day until they decided to re-record these 2 songs with Nicky Moore. That being Pyramid to the Stars and Losing My Grip. Losing My Grip at least would make it onto the next album after Shock Tactics. That being Before the... I think it was Before the Storm, if I am correct. Yes, Before the Storm. And that is, again, that's the only other song of these 2 between Pyramid of the Stars and Losing My Grip that at least made it onto that album, whereas the re-recorded version of Pyramid to the Stars by Nicky Moore would be used as a B-side, but the original versions with Bruce Dickinson and Thunderstick on drums, I believe these are with Thunderstick on drums as well, and not again Mel Gaynor. These versions are also very good. It's just that they are from obviously a cassette or maybe a low-grade tape, at least, because they weren't really. It seemed like they didn't get salvaged. They didn't get saved, so they only used at least a low-grade tape they could find, at least of it. So they are not the best sounding versions, but they are at least a good sort of look into these versions that were at one point were sung by Bruce Dickinson before he would leave Samson. And they're very good. I definitely do like these versions very good too, but I also enjoy the versions with Nicky Moore on vocals. So I'm 50-50. But I have to mention them because of, again, they were outtakes from this album. So there we go. That's pretty much where everything is now ended, since I've got into most of, at least hopefully most of the prime ones. This was definitely a great record from Samson, and this was, of course, with, again, definitely being, it depends on who you ask. Shock Tactics is usually considered, in many people's eyes, as the best Samson album. While I can agree to an extent, I feel I'm still a little bit, I still kind of lean towards Head On a little bit, especially, again, if I hadn't had heard the Tony Platt mix, I would have picked Shock Tactics as I would say, my favorite of the Bruce Dickinson era of Samson. But after hearing that Tony Platt mix of Head On, I definitely still edge on Head On. But this is still a good album. This is still great. There's still a lot of great stuff. Again, Tony Platt's his production and his overall engineering and sound, it still has that sort of dry feel that Flick the Switch definitely had. It's got that same feel, or even like Another Perfect Day from Motorhead. It does have that sound, and I love that kind of sound. It just really, overall, it elevates these tracks, and they're just good. So it's a great record from Samson, and definitely one of the best albums for sure, with either Bruce Dickinson on vocals and just Paul Samson in general. Just a great album. So this would be the final studio album with Bruce Dickinson on vocals, and it would be the final studio album with Thunderstick on drums. Because after this album, Thunderstick would leave the band, and again, Thunderstick, also his real name being Barry Graham Purkis, he leaves the band and he gets replaced by Mel Gaynor, and of course they're off to then to at least to tour for this album, which then its final stop was at the Reading Festival 1981, which would definitely change the course of rock and metal music history forever. And that is a topic for whenever I will get to talk about that album, and I'm going to be talking about that album in at least August, because that is where, while the Live at Reading 81 album didn't really get released until 1990, but the album was recorded at August of 1981, and so I'm choosing to cover that album on the day, at least around its month, where the festival took place and where the recording took place. So I can talk the rest about this and give my thoughts on that live album. So that's until August. But that's where we'll then lead into the next part, which is basically 40 years for this album. And this is where I will be asking you to give your thoughts in the comment section below. Where were you when this album came out? Were you there when this album was released? I know I should be saving this shit for Denim and Leather, but whatever, because it's the fucking same almost lyric variations. Where were you where the dam began to burst? So where were you when this album came out? Were you there when it was released in 1981? Did you pick it up when it came out? Did you wait years later to pick it up? Were you even around when it ever came out? If you did ever get to check out this album or ever hear it, you can leave your thoughts in the comment section below, and they can be thoughts of either whether you liked it or you didn't like it. Again, you can leave all of those thoughts in the comment section below. But if you have never heard Shock Tactics from Samson, Well, if you want a good taste of Paul Samson with Bruce Dickinson, then this is a good album. I mean, I love Head On. That is a very good record from him. But Head On is definitely a solid album. It's one of the more easier ones you can pick up. Because again, while I prefer the Tony Platt mix of Head On, the only way you can really own that album is a part of a CD box set. And depending on how much it's going for these days, since I purchased it last year, I don't know how much it could be at its same price, or it might have bumped up to a little bit more pricier. So if you don't want to spend any more money and want to at least be easier, there still is a Dissonance production CD reissue of Shock Tactics, and you can easily get this on record. I mean, I believe some of the original RCA vinyl pressings are still available, and you can still find them relatively cheap on Discogs or maybe even out in the wild. So it's a very easy album to get a hold of, and therefore this is a good starting point. So with that, again, I hope all of you enjoyed. So that's it. This is it for episode number 111. Alright, so what is going to be next week's episode, which would be episode number 112? Well, let's definitely take a look at my scheduling for next week. I see what is going to be the topic, or at least the album pick for Album of the Week, episode number 112. Third album in a row from Anvil, but it's a classic. It is their debut album. We're going back, yes, back into their past. 40 years, hard and heavy. Yes, I'm going to be now covering Hard and Heavy from Anvil next week. So if you weren't very much interested in my Album of the Week picks for Plenty of Power and Juggernaut of Justice, I'm wondering if you'll be interested in my thoughts on their debut album, the album that pretty much kicked off their career in the first place. Hard and Heavy. Classic debut album. So there you go. That is it for this week's Album of the Week pick. Hope all of you enjoyed. This is Heavy Thrash Head Sam. I am out. And I'll see you all later. Take care, everyone.